The man who couldn't love. He built an empire, then humiliated his wife. Years later, a fateful encounter reveals a secret that forces him to confront his own cowardice. Welcome to our channel, Narratives and Memories. Before we begin, please hit that like button so YouTube knows our content is valuable and can share it with more people. The morning light filtered through the large windows of the sprawling mansion in Bel Air. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint scent of gardenias that Evelyn used to place in glass vases on the table. She, with her long hair and warm smile, was finishing up breakfast. She loved to dote on Charles, her husband. Despite his coldness, there were fleeting moments when she felt he was human, even tender. Charles Anderson was a powerful man, a millionaire by inheritance, but known for having built his own reputation. Always impeccable, always distant. He loved control and hated feeling that something was slipping through his fingers. In the eyes of the world, Evelyn was a lucky woman. She lived a life of luxury with a personal driver, a massage therapist, and access to the city's most exclusive social circles. But the silence between them each morning weighed more than any fortune. They had been married for 7 years. 7 years of treatments, frustrated hopes, and fertility tests. At first, Charles was understanding, even optimistic. But over time, his patience turned into impatience, and then into contempt. "Maybe this just wasn't meant for us," he would say, without even looking her in the eye. One night, during a formal dinner with investors at their home, one of the wives unknowingly asked Evelyn if they were thinking about having children yet. Charles clenched his jaw, avoided answering, and abruptly changed the subject. Later, in private, he exploded. "Do you know what they think of me? That I married a woman who can't give me an heir? Is that what you want them to think? That I'm an incomplete man?" Evelyn shattered inside. Her diagnosis of infertility, which in hindsight was apparently erroneous, haunted her like a shadow. But more than the physical pain, it hurt to see Charles become a stranger. The man who once wrote her a handwritten letter for her birthday now signed checks to buy her silence. Despite everything, she still loved him. Every morning she made him breakfast. Every night she waited for him with a cup of tea. And on every anniversary, she left a note hidden under his pillow, even though he never said anything. One rainy afternoon, while Charles was speaking in a low voice on the phone in his study, Evelyn heard a name she didn't recognize: Victoria. It wasn't just the name, it was the laughter, a laugh he hadn't shared with her in years. Something in her stomach clenched. She didn't want to think the worst, but a pang of intuition pierced her like a thorn. That night, while he slept, she opened one of the drawers of his desk. There she found a folder with legal documents, and among them, a request for the separation of assets. Signed, sealed, and dated. Evelyn's world crumbled in silence. No scream, no tears. Just an almost inaudible whisper escaped her lips. "At what point did you stop loving me?" The next day, Charles left on a business trip to San Francisco. Evelyn, alone in the immensity of the house that no longer felt like hers, began to pack her things. Not by choice, but out of a primal instinct for survival, a mother's strength. The doctor's office smelled of disinfectant and hopelessness. Evelyn squeezed Charles's hand tightly as the doctor reviewed the latest results. Her heart pounding in her ears, she waited for a miracle. But it never came. The doctor's voice was gentle, almost pitiful. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson. There's no progress. The probability of a natural pregnancy remains minimal." Charles didn't even blink. He stood up, gave a curt thanks, and left without looking back. Evelyn took several seconds to react before running after him. In the parking lot, under a relentless sun, he uttered the words that would mark her forever. "I can't keep pretending. This isn't a life. I can't stay with an incomplete woman. The blow wasn't just emotional. It was a surgical wound to her soul. She wanted to reply, but tears beat her to it. Charles, as if he had been rehearsing this speech for months, continued. I need an heir. My mother, my family, everyone expects me to continue the legacy. And you tie me to a failure. Days later, she received a notification from a law firm. She had to vacate the mansion in 15 days. Not only that, Charles had canceled her credit cards, dismissed the domestic staff, and blocked her access to their joint account. Everything disappeared except the memories that mercilessly hammered her mind. Evelyn tried to talk to him. She called, sent messages. She wrote letters that were never delivered, but Charles shielded himself with his pride. In the press, rumors circulated that the marriage had ended due to irreconcilable differences. But within the walls of silence, the truth was far crueler. He discarded her like one discards an investment that hasn't yielded returns. One afternoon, when she tried to withdraw money at a bank, she discovered that even the card with her name on it didn't work. The manager explained with discomfort. Ma'am, your account was closed on the main account holder's instructions. She stumbled out, feeling the ground disappear beneath her feet. In the solitude of the modest boarding house where she was temporarily staying, she wrote in her diary, He took everything from me, except what he can't see, the love that still remains in me, and the strength he underestimated. Charles, for his part, began to appear at social events with a new companion, Victoria Sterling, the daughter of an influential senator. The press called them Mexico's new golden couple. Meanwhile, Evelyn spent her nights doing laundry for neighbors, trying to scrape together enough to pay the next week's rent. It was on one of those days, exhausted and feverish, that she collapsed on the street. And that's where destiny began to change, although she didn't yet know it. A new beginning. The rain fell on the rooftops of Santa Fe with a melancholic rhythm, as if the sky shared Evelyn's grief. She arrived at the bus terminal with an old suitcase, a blanket, and an envelope with the few dollars she had left. No one knew she was the ex-wife of one of the richest men in the country, and she preferred it that way. Auntie Claire, her maternal great-aunt, greeted her with tear-filled eyes and a hug that said more than 1,000 words. The house was small, with peeling walls and the scent of medicinal herbs. But there, for the first time in weeks, Evelyn slept without fear. In the makeshift room she shared with dried plants hanging from the ceiling, she began to understand what it meant to rebuild herself from scratch. There were no golden mirrors or Egyptian cotton sheets, but there was hot tea, silence, and, little by little, peace. Without a degree or formal experience, she found a modest job at a flower shop downtown. She spent hours arranging roses, lilies, and sunflowers. Every flower she cut, every ribbon she tied on the bouquets was a thread of hope between her fingers. The ephemeral and courageous beauty of the flowers resonated with her own life. One morning, as she watered orchids, a woman came in looking for flowers for her mother's funeral. Evelyn, with a gentle voice, put together an arrangement with such care that the customer cried upon receiving it. You have a gift, young lady. Your flowers comfort the soul. Those words were etched in her heart. Despite the pain, something inside her began to germinate. It wasn't rage, nor was it resignation. It was a new kind of strength, silent and serene. Sometimes, as she watched the sun set over the colorful rooftops of Santa Fe, she wondered if Charles thought of her. But she no longer cried for him. One day, while helping Auntie Claire carry some heavy boxes, she felt a sudden dizziness. She thought it was just fatigue, or maybe stress. But that night, feeling a slight tingle in her womb, something awakened. A deep intuition, a whisper from her body that she couldn't ignore. She secretly bought a pregnancy test at the pharmacy. Her heart pounded as she waited for the result. When the 2 red lines appeared clearly, her legs gave way. A warm cry broke from her chest. "My God, I'm pregnant." In the silence of the dark room, Evelyn hugged the pillow and whispered, "No one is going to take this child from me. This one will be mine, and will be loved from the very first heartbeat." A miracle or a cruel joke? The buzzing of the cicadas mingled with the dry heat of the afternoon in Santa Fe. Evelyn had been experiencing nausea, an inexplicable fatigue, and sudden dizziness for days. At first, she thought it was stress, or maybe a persistent flu. But something inside her whispered that it was different, that someone, was growing inside her body. After weeks, she decided to go to the small office of Dr. Beltran, a rural doctor known for the kindness with which she treated her patients. The doctor, with attentive eyes and steady hands, examined her carefully. "We're going to do a blood test, just to rule things out," she said in a calm voice. But Evelyn already knew. Her body was screaming what her mind still resisted accepting. 2 days later, she returned for the results. The paper trembled in her hands, even before she read it. Dr. Beltran entered smiling. "Congratulations, Evelyn. You're pregnant." She was speechless. A dense silence filled the room. Her eyes welled up, her heart raced, and a latent question floated in the air. How can this be? For years, she was told her body was barren, useless for giving life. And now, just as she was alone, without support, without a home, she was pregnant. Was it a miracle or a cruel joke from destiny? The doctor held her hand firmly. Sometimes the body responds when we stop demanding from it. Maybe your soul needed to heal before allowing life to flourish in you. Evelyn left the clinic in a daze. She walked through the cobblestone streets as if floating. People passed, cars honked, but all she heard was her own heart. She returned home and, trembling, told Auntie Claire the news. The old woman cried with joy, hugging her niece as if she were her own daughter. But that night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The weight of the decision began to settle on her shoulders. How could she raise a child alone? What if Charles finds out? What if he tries to take him from me? The memories of what he was capable of doing haunted her. She knew that if this child came into the world, she would never allow him to suffer at his father's hands. However, despite the fear, something new was growing inside her. Not just the baby, but an inner fire. For the first time in a long time, she felt full, complete, capable. It didn't matter that Charles had called her incomplete. Her body was now a home, her soul was a shield, and her heart was a sacred territory. She knelt before the image of Our Lady of the Angels in the corner of the room and whispered, "Thank you, but protect him. Make me strong. For him. For me." The ghosts of regret. The ballroom of the Peninsula Beverly Hills was packed. Golden lights, expensive wine, and manufactured smiles dominated the scene. Charles, in an impeccable dark suit, raised a toast next to Victoria Sterling, his new fiancée. The daughter of an influential senator, beautiful and strategic, Victoria represented everything the world expected of him. Political stability, social legacy, a perfect image. But while she gave an elegant speech about her new philanthropic project, Charles didn't listen to a single word. His gaze was lost in a memory. Evelyn's light laugh on a Sunday morning when he surprised her with pastries and coffee in bed. Why was something so simple 1,000 times more real than all of this? That night, after the event, Charles entered his new apartment alone, all silent marble, like a mausoleum. He turned on the television, but the sound was pure noise. He poured himself a double glass of scotch and stood looking at an old photo tucked among the books. Evelyn, smiling in the garden, holding a pot of lavender. He felt a pang in his chest. It wasn't remorse. It was something worse. Longing. A kind of echoing emptiness, even surrounded by luxury. He tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing. She couldn't give me a child. There was no future with her. But with every attempt at justification, the pain grew. Victoria was beautiful, yes. Educated, elegant, desired. But there was a coldness in her kisses, an absence of soul in her hugs that Charles now noticed. It wasn't her fault. He was just looking for a light in her eyes that only existed in Evelyn's. He started having strange dreams. He dreamed that Evelyn was calling him from afar, in a field of flowers, and he was running, but he could never reach her. He would wake up sweating, with his heart racing and her name stuck in his throat. One day, during a meeting with his lawyers, he overheard an employee comment that he had seen his ex working at a flower shop in Santa Fe. His whole body tensed. Evelyn in Santa Fe? He pretended not to care. But that night, he canceled dinner with Victoria, drove to his old house, and parked in front of it, watching from afar like a stranger. The house looked empty, dead without her. He called his mother, an haughty and demanding woman, and asked her, "Do you think I made a mistake?" The answer was as sharp as a knife. "You made a mistake by taking so long. That woman was never our equal." But Charles no longer believed that. He no longer knew what to believe in. He only knew that somewhere, his absence hurt more than his presence had. And that, no matter how hard he tried to move on, there was an open wound that neither time nor money was managing to close. A fateful encounter. It was a warm morning in Los Angeles when Charles got out of his armored black car, accompanied by advisors and photographers. The visit to the NGO Roots of Hope was part of a campaign to soften his image in the business world. The idea was simple: photos of him handing out food boxes, an inspiring speech, and then a lunch with influential businessmen. A facade routine. The place was simple but full of life. Children ran among wilted flowers and broken toys. Women prepared food in large pots. Charles, with his rehearsed smile, walked among the volunteers. But something made his body freeze. There, at the back of the patio, wearing a floral apron, her hair pulled back in a braid, and a different glow on her face, was Evelyn. She was holding a box of vegetables and giving instructions to a small girl. What paralyzed Charles, however, was not just seeing her there. It was noticing what she was carrying in her womb. A prominent, living, round belly. Evelyn was pregnant. The world around him went silent. The sound of voices, the click of cameras, everything disappeared. He took a step forward without thinking, but before he could say a word, she saw him. For a second, time stood still. Evelyn's eyes widened in surprise, and her expression went from astonishment to fury in a matter of seconds. She turned her face away, handed the box to another volunteer, and walked toward the makeshift kitchen without saying a single word to him. Charles felt a blow to his chest. How is this possible? Whose child is that? And why didn't she tell me? His head spun with 1,000 questions, all unanswered. He spent the rest of the visit on autopilot. He gave the speech, posed for photos, but in his mind there was only one image: Evelyn, radiant, full, with her child. Because, deep down, something inside him told him that that baby was his. And with that idea came a second, even more devastating blow. He had left her just when she had finally given life to what he had so desperately desired. In the car on the way back, his advisors spoke with enthusiasm about the success of the visit. Charles, in silence, looked at his reflection in the window. He remembered the last time he saw her, crying with the divorce papers in her hands. He thought she was broken. But now, it was he who seemed to be in ruins. Upon arriving home, he went straight to the bar. He poured himself a double glass of scotch and called the private detective he had secretly had for years. "I need you to investigate Evelyn Reyes. Where does she live? Who is she with? And how long has she been pregnant?" His voice was trembling, not with anger, but with something Charles no longer knew how to name. Guilt. Meanwhile, in Santa Fe, Evelyn closed her eyes in the small room of the NGO, where she sometimes slept. The reunion had shaken her to the core, but her heart was as clear as the moon that lit up the night. "I will not allow him to break me again. Not me, and not my child." The man who loved too late, the sound of the scotch hitting the glass was the only noise in the dark apartment. Charles spent his nights staring at the ceiling, Evelyn's face etched in his mind like a tattoo that burned. Pregnant? After everything the doctors said? It can't be mine. It can't be. That's what he repeated like a mantra. But doubt had already set in and was growing like a slow poison. In the following days, Charles became a ghost. He canceled meetings, avoided Victoria, and ordered his private detective to report on Evelyn's every move. He received photos daily, her helping customers at the flower shop, leading workshops at the NGO, buying fruit at the market with a hand on her belly, and always smiling. That last part tortured him. Why does she look so happy? How can she be so full without me? The question hurt more than he wanted to admit. For years, he believed she depended on him, that without his protection she would wither away. But there she was, flourishing without him, and maybe with his child in her womb. Charles began to drive alone to Santa Fe on weekends, without telling anyone. He would stay in his car, watching from afar, with dark sunglasses and the engine off. One afternoon, he saw her helping a child draw flowers on a community mural. The boy rested his head on her belly and said, "Have you talked to your baby yet? I talk to my little brother like that." She laughed and replied, "Of course I tell him everything." That was too much, and as Charles gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes burning, that child, that gesture, he was the one who had dreamed of that moment. And yet, he had thrown it all away with harsh words and proud decisions. But he still clung to excuses. He told himself that maybe she was with someone else, that maybe she had moved on quickly. "I have no proof that that child is mine. I can't assume something like that without certainty." But deep down, he already knew. He knew her eyes. He knew their own timeline. The baby would be born exactly 8 months after the divorce. One night, drunk and consumed by anguish, Charles called Evelyn. She didn't answer. He sent a message. "We need to talk." She replied hours later, dryly, "There's nothing to say. What you broke cannot be fixed with words." He threw his phone against the wall. The sound of the glass shattering echoed in the empty room. For the first time, the loneliness was deafening. No glass of wine, no Persian rug, no imported car eased the hole in his chest. Regret began to burn inside, but his pride still fought to extinguish the fire. And as happens with men who love too late, Charles was discovering that denial was just the beginning of the fall. A letter from the past. The rain fell heavily that night, exactly like the first time Charles and Evelyn kissed. He was standing in his library, holding a picture frame with an old photo of them both, her laughing with her eyes closed as he held her in his arms in front of a fountain in Sonoma. He could still hear that laugh. The memories came like tides, without warning. He remembered the first time they talked about having children. They were lying on the grass in Lake Arrowhead after a hike. Evelyn, with her head on his chest, said, "I've always dreamed of having a little girl with your smile." He laughed and replied, "And I've always been terrified of being a father." She looked at him, confused, but he looked away. The truth was that Charles carried a pain he never knew how to name. His father abandoned him when he was 8. He grew up listening to his mother say that men are useless. When he finally inherited the family businesses, he swore he would never be weak, that he would never depend on anyone. And deep down, he believed that loving too much was a risk, an invitation to loss. But with Evelyn, everything seemed easier. In the beginning, she was his light, his refuge. He remembered how she decorated the house with flowers, how she sang old tunes while cooking, how she looked at him as if he were more than just a man in business magazines. She made him feel human. Over the years, the pressure to have children came like an avalanche. Family dinners, veiled conversations, inquisitive glances. Charles wanted to be a father. Yes, he wanted to, but he was terrified of failing, of repeating the abandonment he himself had suffered. When the tests revealed difficulties, he froze. He began to distance himself, not out of a lack of love, but out of fear of feeling powerless. He remembered one night when he found Evelyn crying alone in the bathroom, hugging a negative test. He wanted to comfort her, but he just stood in the doorway, not knowing what to say. He ended up going back to his office, faking an important call. That still haunted him. And then came the breakup. The harsh words, the divorce, the cold signature on the papers. He told himself it was the right thing to do, that he needed an heir. But now, faced with the memory of the love he lost, everything seemed like a house of cards, and he, the man who knocked it down with his own hands. Charles lay down on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, his eyes burning. He felt like the 8-year-old boy who waited for his father at the door and understood that night that he would never return. Maybe that's why I pushed her away, because when I needed her most, I didn't know how to hold her. And now she was gone, too. But this time, there was still a chance. Or was it already too late? The sun was beginning to set over the mountains of Santa Fe when Charles finally mustered the courage. He wore a simple shirt, no tie, trying to look less like himself. His black car was parked 2 blocks away. He wanted her to see him as a man, not a magnate. The flower shop was about to close. The little bell on the door rang softly when he entered. Evelyn, with her back to him, was arranging a vase of sunflowers. Hearing the sound, she turned slowly. The air froze between them. He said nothing for a moment. He just looked at her. Her eyes were firm, her belly was more visible, and the silence was cutting. "I need to know if that child is mine," he said directly, in a low but firm voice. Evelyn felt her heart plummet. She gripped her apron tightly. She took a deep breath. The pain accumulated over months burned in her throat. "You're interested now? Now you have time to come and ask me something you lost the right to know?" Charles tried to approach, but she stepped back. Her eyes were moist, but her voice came out with firmness. "You called me incomplete. You took everything from me. You left me alone, broken. And now that you see me with life, with strength, with a child you didn't expect, you come to claim him as if you still had a place in my story." He swallowed hard. That hurt more than he had imagined. But he insisted. "I'm not claiming him. I just want to know the truth. If he is mine, I want to take responsibility. I won't run away." Evelyn laughed bitterly. "Take responsibility? Charles, I don't need your money or your late promises. I don't want your guilt disguised as responsibility. This child isn't going to grow up hearing that he was an accident. He's going to know that he was wanted. By me. From the very first heartbeat." A heavy silence fell between them. Charles tried to say something else, but she turned around and opened the shop door with a determined gesture. "Go. Don't come back. You have no right to this baby, much less to me." He left slowly, his chest on fire. Every step away from her was like walking on hot coals. For the first time, Charles Anderson was experiencing the real weight of his decisions. He wasn't being rejected by chance. It was a consequence, a second chance. The fine rain fell on the city as if the sky, too, were in mourning. Charles drove slowly, almost aimlessly, but his heart was leading him to a specific destination, the old house where he and Evelyn had lived. He parked in front of the iron gate, now covered in rust. The house was empty, for sale. A garden without flowers, dusty windows, and a silence that screamed. He got out of the car and touched the gate, as if he expected her to still open the door, smiling. But all he found were memories. In the garden, he remembered Evelyn with her hands full of dirt, planting daisies. On the terrace, they would have coffee while talking about the future, a future he himself had destroyed, driven by something he couldn't even explain. He drove to his great-aunt Claire's house, the only person in his family who had always spoken to him with honesty. She received him with surprise, but also with tenderness. She looked him in the eye and said without mincing words, "You look like your grandfather when he lost the love of his life. Tough on the outside, empty on the inside." Charles sat on the old living room sofa, his head down. He told her everything: Evelyn's pregnancy, the encounter at the NGO, the confrontation at the flower shop. He expected to be judged, but he received silence. Until Auntie Claire got up, went to an old drawer, and returned with a yellowed envelope. "This arrived months ago. The girl left it with a neighbor. I guess it was for you, but you were so busy running away that you never found out." Charles took the letter with trembling hands. It was Evelyn's handwriting. He opened it carefully. The paper smelled of lavender and nostalgia. "Charles, I know you're leaving. I know I'm no longer the woman you want, but I want you to know something before you disappear from my life completely. I never stopped dreaming of you, not even when the pain was tearing me apart. I don't know if you will ever forgive me for not being able to give you a child, but if a miracle ever comes, I want you to know that you were the first man I imagined as a father. With everything I have left, Evelyn." The words crushed him. A love letter, written shortly before the end. A declaration of hope and pain never read. Charles wept. Not as a businessman, not as a public figure, but as a broken human being. "Auntie, what have I done? How could I have been so blind?" Auntie Claire came closer, stroked his face, and simply said, "Sometimes the hardest heart is the one that is most afraid to love. But if it still beats for her, don't give up." The early morning was falling silently over Santa Fe when a sharp pain woke Evelyn from a restless sleep. It was too soon. There were still weeks to go before the birth. But something wasn't right. She felt the contraction like a wave tearing her apart inside. Her breathing became ragged, and a cold sweat ran down her forehead. "No, not yet," she whispered, trying to get out of bed. She cried out for Auntie Claire, who ran to the room with fear in her eyes. Seeing her niece's expression of pain and the stained sheet, she grabbed the phone and called a taxi. The nearest hospital was 20 minutes away. Every second was an eternity. Meanwhile, Charles, still with Evelyn's letter folded in his pocket, was in his apartment staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The phone rang. It was the detective. "Sir, Mrs. Reyes was admitted to the hospital. It looks like she went into premature labor." The glass of water fell from his hand. The sound of the breaking glass was drowned out by the pounding of his heart. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his car keys and drove through the empty pre-dawn streets to Santa Fe. The city lights flickered as if destiny were sending him signals. Upon arriving at the hospital, sweating and disheveled, he desperately asked for Evelyn Reyes. The receptionist hesitated, but seeing his anguish, she pointed him to the maternity ward hallway. In room 208, he saw her, lying down, pale, with her eyes closed. Doctors moved around her. Auntie Claire saw him and for an instant wanted to throw him out. But her eyes shone with something between rage and compassion. "You're late, but you made it." Evelyn saw him for the first time as they wheeled her toward the operating room. Her eyes opened, confused. He held her hand for an instant. "I'm here." She didn't say anything, just closed her eyes, overcome by the pain. The delivery was complicated. Screams, medical orders, beeping machines were all he could hear. Charles, outside the operating room, paced back and forth like a lost child. And then came the sound that cut through everything. A baby crying. The doors opened. A nurse came out with a tired smile. "It's a boy. He's okay, and so is she." Charles fell to his knees in the hallway. Tears streamed freely. For the first time, he felt the weight and the blessing of being a father. Hours later, he entered the room. Evelyn was asleep. In the bassinet next to the bed was a small, pink baby, with his eyes closed and his fists clenched. Charles approached with trembling hands. He touched the baby's head delicately. "Hello, Leo. It's me." And there, in that instant, without contracts, without fortunes, without pride, a man fell apart, and a father was born. The path to forgiveness. The morning light filtered through the hospital room windows, coloring the air with soft golden tones. The silence was only interrupted by Leo's quiet breathing in the bassinet next to the bed. Charles was sitting in a chair with swollen eyes and a shattered soul. He hadn't slept in hours. He couldn't. Every glance at the baby was a miracle and a stab wound. Auntie Claire, with a stern look, entered the room and handed him a blanket. "Hold him. Babies recognize the heart of the one who loves them." Charles hesitated, but finally got up and walked to the crib. His trembling hands touched Leo's soft skin. And then, as if the world had stopped, he took him into his arms. Leo made a small sound, almost a sigh, and settled against his father's chest. Charles cried silently. The tears fell without hurry, as if they were washing away years of hardness. He felt for the first time that something inside him was opening up, a space that had never been touched before. Evelyn woke up slowly. When she saw the scene, her body tensed. The image of Charles holding their son was at the same time touching and terrifying. She spoke in a low but firm voice. "Who gave you permission to touch him?" Charles looked at her with red eyes, and his soul laid bare. "I didn't touch him as Charles Anderson. I held him as a broken man, as a father who didn't know how to be here on time." Evelyn looked away. The emotion on her face was evident, but she didn't give in. It's not enough to show up when everything is already done. It's not enough to cry. I went through this pregnancy alone. I cried every night alone, and I protected him from you, because you were the one who abandoned us. He approached, still with Leo in his arms. He wanted to kneel, to beg, to scream, but he did none of that. He just murmured, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I want to be here, even from a distance. I want him to know me." Evelyn held out her arms and took Leo back. She looked at him as one holds a piece of one's own heart, and said, without hatred, "But with pain, you're going to have to prove it. Not with words, Charles. With actions. And that takes time." He understood. He returned the blanket he was still holding. He gently stroked the baby's little foot and left the room in silence, his chest full of love and guilt. The weeks that followed Leo's birth were a mix of tenderness and exhaustion for Evelyn. The sleepless nights, the unexpected cries, the constant fear of making a mistake, everything was new. But there was also light. Every smile from her baby, every curious look was a reminder that it was worth it to keep going, even with a broken heart. Charles, for his part, kept his distance. He kept his promise. He didn't invade. He didn't insist. but he began to act in silence. He hired an excellent pediatrician to care for Leo without them knowing he was behind it. He discreetly paid the hospital bills, and every week, a new anonymous delivery would arrive at Auntie Claire's house. Diapers, lotions, carefully chosen clothes. At first, Evelyn was suspicious. She thought they were donations from the NGO, but there were too many details. The exact size of the clothes, the brand of soap she preferred, even a rattle shaped like a sunflower, her favorite flower. Something inside her told her it was Charles, and that disarmed her. One morning, upon opening one of the boxes, she found a small, unsigned note. It just said, "I know I was late, but I still want to learn to be the man you deserve." Evelyn read it in silence. The tears came without her being able to stop them. Auntie Claire, always attentive, sat next to her niece and said, "I'm not telling you to forgive him, but there are men who change when love hurts them more than pride." Evelyn was still afraid of making a mistake, of opening the door again to a man who had left her in ruins. But she also felt something different. Charles's presence, though absent, was felt in every gesture, and that was starting to confuse the heart she thought she had shielded forever. Leo, with his big, lively eyes, seemed to notice that change. Every time he saw a new box, he would wave his little arms as if he knew that, inside there was affection, however discreet. And Evelyn was beginning to understand something that hurt to accept. Charles was trying, in his own way, as he knew how, as he could. One rainy afternoon, Leo got a fever. Evelyn panicked. She didn't know what to do. She called the pediatrician's number that the NGO had gotten for her. In less than 15 minutes, the doctor was at the door with everything he needed. Seeing something in his attitude, in his care, she asked, "Who sent you?" The doctor smiled, hesitated for a moment, but was honest. "Let's just say it's someone who still believes he can fix what he broke." Evelyn fell silent. She looked at the sleeping Leo and whispered, "Maybe, just maybe." It was a sweltering night when Leo began to cry in a different way. His little body was burning with fever, and his eyes were glassy. Evelyn, desperate, tried to bring it down with cold compresses, but nothing worked. Auntie Claire called an urgent taxi, and in minutes they were at the nearest hospital. In the emergency room, Evelyn tried to stay calm, but her hands were trembling. Leo was crying weakly, as if he no longer had the strength. The doctor examined him, but time dragged on like a punishment. It was then that, suddenly, the waiting room door opened, and Charles appeared. She didn't ask how he knew. She just looked at him with tear-filled eyes and said nothing. Charles walked to her, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't try to justify himself. He just sat by her side in silence, like someone who understands that words are no longer enough. Hours later, the doctor informed them that it was just a mild viral infection, but that Leo would remain under observation for 24 hours. Evelyn breathed a sigh of relief and, turning, saw Charles leaning against the wall, his gaze fixed on the baby sleeping through the window of the ICU. "Thank you for coming," she murmured, without looking at him directly. He felt her emotion. "I couldn't stay home knowing he was sick. Not again." The nurse informed them that only one parent could spend the night in the observation room with the baby. Evelyn hesitated. She was exhausted, emotionally drained. She looked at Charles, and in a silent gesture, she handed him the little bag with Leo's clothes. "Take care of him," she said simply. Charles entered the room with a tight heart. Leo was sleeping, connected to monitors and tubes. He sat next to the small hospital bed and took his son's tiny hand. During the night, he didn't sleep. He sang the lullabies his mother used to sing to him. He made promises. He cried. He asked for forgiveness. not out loud, but with his gaze, with his touch, with his presence. Outside, Evelyn watched through the small window in the door. She saw Charles bent over the crib, his face tired, but full of love. For the first time, she didn't see the proud man who had broken her, but a father. A man trying to love well, and that moved her inside. The next morning, when Charles left the room with Leo in his arms, she held out her arms. He handed her the baby with a gentle kiss on the forehead, and before leaving, he murmured, "Thank you for trusting me, even if only for one night." Evelyn didn't reply, but inside, something was beginning to change. Not all the words in the world would have done what that silent night accomplished, showing her that maybe he could still be a part of their story. The hospital was already silent when Auntie Claire took Leo home, insisting that Evelyn get some rest. But that night, sleep didn't come. Sitting on a bench in the hospital's outdoor garden, Evelyn hugged her knees, looking at the cloudy sky. The weight of the last few days left her vulnerable and confused. Charles approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. He sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. For several minutes, neither of them said anything. Only the sound of the crickets and the rustling of the trees filled the air. "I don't know where to start," he murmured, looking at the ground. Evelyn took a deep breath, not responding. He continued, "I believed that by leaving, I was doing you a favor. I thought that by going away, I was freeing you from the failure we both felt. But the truth is, I left because I was scared. Scared of being like my father, of staying, of failing you, of repeating his abandonment." She looked at him, surprised. She had never seen him so exposed, so fragile. "And so you decided to abandon me first," she replied with contained pain. "As if that would hurt less." Charles nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "Yes, and you don't know how much I regret it. Since you left, there hasn't been a single day that your absence hasn't hurt me. I became everything I swore I would never be. A lonely, empty man, with success, but no soul." Evelyn's tears finally fell. Not just for him, but for her. For everything she went through alone. For the nights of fear. For the words that were never said. "You broke something inside me, Charles. Something that took a lot to heal." He moved a little closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "I'm not here to ask you to love me again. I know that's not something you can demand. I just want you to know that I love you, in a way I never knew how to before, and that, if you let me, I want to try to be someone worthy of you and of Leo." The silence between them was now different, dense, loaded with memories and possibilities. Evelyn wiped her eyes. Her heart was divided between the pain of the past and the echo of a love that perhaps still lived. But it was still too soon. The wound was still open, although it was beginning to heal. "Don't promise anything, Charles. Just show me who you can be now." And in that early morning, without kisses, without a conclusion, just with the truth laid bare, two hearts began to find their way back to each other. Slowly, with fear, but alive. The scent of lavender and chamomile tea filled Auntie Claire's small room. The days had become slower for the old woman, who now spent most of her time lying down, looking out the window where the bougainvillea flowers danced with the wind. Her body was starting to give way, but her mind was still lucid, and her heart was restless. Evelyn entered with Leo in her arms. Her tired expression was mixed with tenderness as she saw her great-aunt smile, though fragile. She placed the baby next to her, and for a few minutes, no words were spoken, only glances, sighs, and a silent affection among 3 generations. "Now your son has your father's eyes," Auntie Claire murmured, stroking Leo's little hand, "and the strong soul of the Anderson women." Evelyn smiled sadly, sitting down by the bed, Her eyes soon filled with tears. There was no need to explain anything. Her great-aunt knew that look, the look of someone who carries an unresolved love. "I saw him cry, Auntie. He talked to me like never before. He says he's changed, but I don't know if I can trust him again. I'm scared to open the door and have him break me again." Auntie Claire squeezed her hand with a surprising strength for someone so frail. "My dear, true love isn't about not being scared. It's about feeling it and still choosing to love." Evelyn cried in silence, looking at the sleeping Leo. Auntie Claire continued, "Forgiving isn't forgetting what happened. It's choosing not to let that pain chain you. Charles doesn't deserve a second chance just because he wants one. But you do deserve to live without carrying resentment." She looked at her with tear-filled eyes, but also with brilliant clarity. "I loved once, and out of pride, I let him go. I lived for many years with that thorn. I don't want you to live like that." Evelyn felt the weight and the lightness of those words. It was as if her heart, until then silent, began to whisper. There was no definitive answer, but there was a path. And maybe deep down, she knew that path involved listening to what love still had to say to her. As she left the room with Leo snuggled against her chest, she looked at the pink evening sky and whispered, "Maybe so. Maybe there's still something to save." The cafe in the small square in Santa Fe was almost empty when Evelyn arrived. She had Leo in the stroller, and her eyes were heavy with silence. Charles was already waiting for her, sitting at a discreet table with a humble and anxious expression. When he saw her, he got up slowly, but she made a hand signal. "Today, just listen, please." He nodded without a word. He sat down. They were face to face, but between them was a broken bridge, made of memories, wounds, and unfulfilled promises. Evelyn looked at Leo, who was sleeping peacefully, before she began to speak. "For months, I slept with fear. Fear of not having enough to feed him, that something would happen to him, that he would be born and not recognize me as his mom." Her voice was firm, but full of emotion. "You have no idea what it was like to feel that the ground was being torn from under my feet. You were my home, Charles, my refuge. And one day, you simply left me on the street as if I had never meant anything." He gripped his hands on the table but remained silent. His eyes shone, but he didn't dare to interrupt. "I cried until I had no more tears. I felt empty, useless, and still, I never stopped loving you. I hated myself for it. How can you love someone who broke you?" She paused. She took a deep breath. But then Leo grew inside me, and with every heartbeat of his, something of mine was reborn. I discovered that the love I had for you wasn't a weakness. It was my strength. I survived because of him. And yes, also because of what we once were. Charles held back tears. His eyes were fixed on hers, as if every word was being deeply etched into his chest. "When I saw you at the hospital, when you held him, I saw the man I dreamed of being, the father of my child. But I also remembered the one who abandoned me without looking back, and that still hurts." She extended her hand, lightly touched his, and in a soft voice she completed, "I don't know if I can trust you again, but I also don't want to live with this wall between us. For Leo, and for what's left of us, we deserve to try." Charles finally spoke in a broken whisper. "Thank you for giving me this chance, even with fear. I promise not to waste it." And in that instant, between tears and confessions, between pain and hope, something new began to be born. It wasn't a reconciliation yet, but it was forgiveness, and with it came the true opportunity to start over. A new kind of family. It was a Sunday morning, and the sun was shyly entering through the window of Auntie Claire's small house. Evelyn had invited Charles to spend a few hours with Leo. They didn't live together yet, They hadn't officially gotten back together, but now he was welcome, with boundaries, with caution, but with space to be a father. Leo, at almost 9 months old, was starting to explore the world with curious eyes and wobbly steps. He was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by toys. Charles, kneeling beside him, made funny voices with a teddy bear. Evelyn watched from a distance, leaning against the kitchen doorway, with a mix of love and doubt dancing in her chest. "He's the bravest bear in the world," Charles said, while pretending to battle a stuffed giraffe. Leo laughed with his mouth wide open, that pure, contagious, life-filled laughter that only babies know how to give. Evelyn allowed herself to smile. It was beautiful to see them together, but there was still a part of her that was protecting itself, an invisible barrier that time and actions were trying to slowly dissolve. Then, suddenly, Leo babbled something. At first it was just a sound, but the second time it was clear, loud, and unexpected. "Daddy!" Time stopped. Charles froze, as if he wasn't sure what he had just heard. Evelyn dropped the kitchen towel she was holding. Leo repeated it, now pointing his little fingers at the man in front of him. "Daddy!" Charles's eyes filled with tears instantly. A lump formed in his throat, and he fell to his knees, hugging his son with all the care in the world. "Leo, my love, I'm your daddy," he whispered through his tears, kissing the top of the boy's head. Evelyn brought a hand to her mouth. She was crying silently. There was nothing more to say. In that instant, no promise, no explanation, no apology was worth more than that word, spoken with innocence and truth. Leo had chosen, and with a single word, he disarmed the past, broke down the barriers, and showed that sometimes love just needs a sign to flourish again. The sky over Santa Fe seemed hand-painted. Soft clouds floated lazily, and the air was filled with the scent of wildflowers. At the top of a hill, among ancient trees and a small wooden altar adorned with lavender, Charles waited. He was more nervous than he had ever been. He was no longer the man in expensive suits and cold speeches. He was just a man in love, waiting for the woman who changed his life. The ceremony had been planned with simplicity. No luxury, no photographers, or influential guests. Just the closest people. Auntie Claire, some neighbors from the NGO, the nurse who cared for Leo, and the priest who baptized the children of the town. Charles wanted it that way. A new beginning, clean and pure. The chairs were filled with wildflowers. A lone violin played a soft melody. And then the murmur spread. "Here she comes!" Evelyn appeared at the top of the hill with Leo in her arms, dressed in white. The dress was simple, made of lightweight fabric. But she looked like she had stepped out of a dream. The wind played with her skirt and her hair, and the baby was smiling, waving his little arms, as if he knew that that day was special. Charles saw her and felt his legs weaken. His eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just from seeing her so beautiful. It was from seeing her there, present, choosing him again, choosing them. When she reached the altar, Evelyn handed Leo to Auntie Claire's arms and looked into Charles's eyes. He took her hands, and with a choked voice he said, "I don't have perfect promises, but I have a heart that now beats complete, thanks to you and our son. I want to love you as one loves when they understand the value of losing." She smiled, moved. Tears rolled down her face, but they weren't of pain. They were of liberation. "And I choose to trust. I choose to heal with you, because I learned that love isn't the absence of wounds. It's knowing how to love again, even with the scars." The priest blessed them with simple, true words. When they were finally declared husband and wife, the applause was soft, but full of soul. Auntie Claire cried without restraint. Leo in her arms babbled with laughter, as if he felt that everything was finally in its place. At the end of the afternoon, as they danced barefoot on the grass, Charles held Evelyn by the waist and Leo in his arms. The sun was setting behind the mountains, coloring the sky orange and gold. And there, without luxury, without an audience, the family that destiny almost destroyed was born, and which love, with patience, rebuilt. The house was small, with adobe walls, wooden windows, and a garden that Evelyn insisted on tending every day. There were lavender pots at the entrance, toys scattered on the grass, and the constant sound of laughter, especially Leo's, who was now just over a year old, running after a stubborn chicken that had escaped the coop. Charles was on the terrace, barefoot, with a cup of coffee in his hands. He watched the scene as one watches the greatest show of one's life. His wife, in a light dress with dirt on her feet, guiding their son with patience and joy. That was everything he never knew he needed. They didn't live in luxury. Money was now secondary. He had left part of his business behind, ceding control of the company to his brother. He wanted time with Leo, time with Evelyn, time to be the man he always wanted to be, but who only now knew how. Sometimes, at night, Evelyn would wake up from nightmares of the past. Sometimes, Charles still blamed himself for everything he had destroyed. But in those moments, a silent hug was enough, the warmth of the other in the narrow bed, to remember that they were there, together, and that was already everything. Auntie Claire spent the weekends with them, telling old stories, teaching Leo how to plant beans in glass jars. The house was never silent. It always smelled of baking bread. Soft music played on the old radio, and tiny footsteps ran through the living room. Charles spent hours building wooden toys in the yard. Leo would say, "Daddy," with pride, and "Mommy," with tenderness. And every time he fell and cried, they were both the ones who ran to pick him up. There were no perfect roles. There was love, divided, shared, present. One afternoon, they sat together on the swing in the garden, made of ropes and a board. Evelyn rested her head on Charles's shoulder, and Leo was sleeping on her lap. The sun was setting slowly, coloring the sky with warm tones, as if the whole world sighed in peace. "Do you think this will last?" Evelyn murmured. "I don't know how long," Charles replied, kissing her forehead. "But I know that every day we will choose it, because love hadn't healed everything. The scars were still there, like marks from a war that had been overcome. But love transformed everything. And in that modest house, with laughter in the garden and a swing that creaked softly, they finally had a home.